Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to today's topic session. My name is Ashley, and I'll be co-leading today's session with Sim. I hope everyone had a great finals week and is ready for the holidays because I definitely am. So today we're going to cover 4 passages on electrochemistry, reproduction and development, and cars and amino acids. I hope you guys have done the 2 passages before the session, but if not, don't worry because you can still do them later and look back at the recording from today. Oh, sorry, 1 second. My headphones are not connected. So this is the overview. We'll start off with the passage on electrochemistry that we assigned to you first, then the amino acids passage, and then we'll give you guys about 20 minutes to complete the reproduction and cars passage. Okay, so this is the passage that was assigned, but before we dive into the questions, does anyone have any questions or concerns? Was the passage easy, medium, or difficult? Okay, that's good to hear. So did anyone have any issues with the first question or want to explain how you got your answer? As a reminder, the recording will be sent in the post-topic session email. Okay, so for this question, you have to look at table 2 in the passage. So we see the reduction potential change with each changing concentration of zinc ions, and these values are all positive. So thinking back at the spontaneity equation for electrochemical cells, where delta G equals negative N times F, the Faraday's constant, and the difference in reduction potentials of the two cells, so E cell, a positive value of E must mean that the delta G is negative. If delta G is negative, then the reaction is spontaneous, and only galvanic cells or voltaic cells are spontaneous. So D is our answer. Make sense?
What does the E represent? Because I think for that question, I got the answer right, but I think I assumed that the E represented the EMF.
So E is it's just the reduction potential of the two cells, or it's the difference in the reduction potential. So it would be like E, I think it's E ox minus, sorry, it's E reduction minus E oxidation.
Thank you.
Mhm. So for this question, would anyone like to volunteer first? Yeah. So D is our answer. And to answer this question, you have to remember from the previous question that the cells are galvanic cells or voltaic cells. In this type of cell, the cathode is positive and the anode is negative. So you can remember the mnemonic red cat and ox. I know some people use oil rig, but I don't know, I like this mnemonic more. So reduction occurs at the cathode and oxidation occurs at the anode. So the positive electrode is the cathode where reduction takes place. Again, D is our answer. In electrolytic cells, the signs of the cathode and anode are switched because the battery pumps electrons away from the anode, making it positive. And for this question, did anyone have an answer? Yeah. Okay. So for this question, you have to refer back to table 1. The question is telling you that the electrons flow from the zinc electrode to the M electrode. meaning that oxidation is occurring at the zinc electrode because it's losing electrons. So the zinc electrode would be the anode. The passage also tells you that when the switch is closed, the total cell potential is 1.28 volts. Using the equation E cell equals E reduction minus E oxidation, you can plug in the value for E oxidation, which is negative 0.76 volts, because like we said, the zinc electrode is the anode and it's undergoing oxidation. And E cell, which is 1.28 volts. So plugging those numbers in, you can find E reduction. And that gives us 0.52 volts. And to match that number with table 1, we know that copper would be our cathode.
Could you explain this question again? I'm sorry. So for this one, was there a reaction that was given, or we had to make our own reaction and then use the formula?
So for this one, you have to use the formula to figure out what reaction is happening. So like I said last week that in the MCAT, you have to use equations to the best of your ability. So like E cell equals E reduction minus E oxidation. You
Mm-hmm.
have the value for E oxidation because the question is telling you here that the direction of electron flow is from the zinc to the M electrode. By saying this, they're telling you that the zinc electrode is the anode because it's undergoing oxidation. So you have E sub oxidation, which
Mm-hmm.
is, where is it? Oh, negative 0.76 volts. So you plug that into this equation and you're trying to find the value of E reduction
Mm-hmm.
to find which of these metals is the cathode. So
Mm-hmm.
you use E cell, which they told you in the passage that E cell is 1.28 volts.
Okay.
And now that you have these two values, you can easily solve for E reduction.
Okay. And I guess my last question is, I'm sorry, could you explain to me how you understood that it was the ZN was oxidized? Because what I would have done is I think I would have just looked at the graph and I would have saw that negative number and assumed it was oxidized.
No. So this is standard. You have to think. So every situation is different. The question will allude to you if the zinc electrode is the cathode or the anode. So if the zinc electrode was, let's say, the cathode, where it's gaining electrons, then
Oh, okay. They did give us the half. You have to look at the half reaction to see that it's
yeah.
oxidized. Okay, thank you. Sorry
Mhm.
about that.
And yes, 1.28 was given. Let me see if I can go back to that. Here. Yeah, when the switch was closed, the voltmeter read 1.28 volts. So that would be E cell. Okay, for question 4, did anyone have a question about this, or do you want to volunteer your answer? Yeah. So in experiment 2, the cells are spontaneous because you did have that negative delta G. So large values of the equilibrium constant K are associated with negative delta Gs because the products are favored over the reactants. And we are assuming that the reactions in experiment 2 occurred because they gave us data for experiment 2. So then we can conclude that the products are favored and thus delta G would be negative. So D is our answer. So anyone have any questions about that before I get into the last question?
I was gonna ask, does that refer back to when we use that delta G cells equal to NFE cell formula?
Um, no.
Because I think
So
I'm sorry.
yeah, so this question, if anything, it would pertain to the Nernst equation, if I'm not wrong. One
Okay.
second.
Because I think I
Because
just, okay, sorry.
No, sorry, go ahead.
I guess for me, it's like I'm getting like some of the answers right. I just like I want to make sure that I'm like using the proper reasoning, if that makes sense. Because I think I just looked at the chart and I based it off of the values, or I think I might have done process elimination, but that might take a little longer for me to figure out. So I think I'll just like email you or wait till the end.
Okay, yeah, for sure. You can always email me with questions and we can set up like a one-to-one thing. But to further clarify this question, you would also just have to use like logic and reasoning as well. Like delta G, like negative delta G is typically associated with larger K values because a larger K means that products are favored over the reactants. So that means that the reaction is spontaneous, if that makes sense.
It does. Thank you.
Okay. So for the final question, would anyone like to volunteer? Yeah, do you want to explain how you got B?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure if I got this correctly, but I kind of did it in a process of elimination. So since they told us that the initial concentration as the initial I looked at what was happening to the E as the initial concentration was increasing, and then I saw that it was decreasing. So then that's kind of like how I got my answer.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's exactly right. So, this question is like very straightforward, and sometimes the MCAT will include like an unfamiliar thing or make a simple question sound more complicated than it is. But really, like all you have to do is just look at table two. So as the zinc concentration increases, the voltage decreases. So B is our answer. There is no evidence for D or C, and A is wrong because table two is telling us that the voltage decreased. Yeah. And you don't even need to be familiar with the Nernst equation to even answer this question. Like you just literally have to look at table two. I've had straightforward questions like this on the actual MCAT, and the important thing is to look at the question as a whole and use the passage to the best of your ability and to always never second guess yourself.
All right, thank you so much because I think I might have started like overthinking some of these questions because I was like, okay, this is no way it can just be like that.
Yeah, I know. I've had that exact thought on the actual MCAT, and then eventually with the pressure of time, you just have to trust your instinct and move forward. Okay, and now we can move on to Sim's passage on amino acids.
Okay, how did this passage go for you guys? Was it easy, medium, hard? Okay. Okay, we'll go over it. So for number one, what did you guys get for this? C. Okay. Do you want to explain? Okay, between A and C. Okay. Yeah, so it is C. So asking for the lowest RF value is asking which one is the most polar, meaning that would travel up the least amount in the TLC. So that would be PLP, just by looking at the figure. Sorry, I'm gonna pause this real quick. Okay, can you guys see this? Oh. so looking at this figure, PLP is this figure right here, and it has nitrogen, oxygen, and phosphate as well. So the RF value is based on polarity, and since PLP has the largest number of polar groups, it would have the lowest RF value. Does that make sense? Okay.
Oh, I know
What
this
ab-
is a silly question for the first one, but
Yeah.
I was going to ask you, so maybe because it was hard for me to really digest what the passage was saying. So I guess the passage told us that figure was PLP.
Yeah, so it says figure 1 biochemical mechanism for the amino acid synthesis by the PLP. So you can kind of assume that this is PLP here. And this is the tyrosine.
Thank you.
And I think it mentions it here as well in figure 1 that the alpha proton, like this paragraph here. So I would assume that PLP is pertaining to this figure. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you so much.
Okay, what about number 2? Okay, so we're looking for the RF value for alanine. And that is this one right here. And so how can you find the RF value? This is the distance between the molecule and the solvent. So the solvent front is all the way up here. So you can see the origin is not at zeros, it's at 1. So you need to calculate that differently. So what you would do here is the solvent front is from 2.2 and it starts at 1. So the distance traveled is going to be 2.2 minus 1, which is 1.2. And alanine travels 1.4. And that is, you would have to subtract that difference from the starting point at 1. So that would be 0.4. So the molecule traveled 0.4 and the solvent traveled 1.2. So that would be 0.4 divided by 1.2, which is going to be 0.33. Does that make sense? I think the tricky part here was noticing that this was at 1 and not 0. Does anyone have any questions on that? Could I explain it again? Yeah, which part are you confused about?
I understand the formula, so I'm so sorry. If you could just like run down like what you said again about
Yeah,
figuring out which one was the actual numerical value for the number traveled and the solvent
yeah, for
traveled.
sure. So the formula right here is the distance the molecule traveled versus the distance the solvent front traveled. So the molecule is alanine, and alanine is right here. So that one traveled from 1 to 1.4. So just looking at the difference between those distance, that is going to be 0.4. Let me write this down for you guys. Okay, and that 0.4 is because 1.4 minus 1 is 0.4. That's the distance between the molecule and how much it traveled from the origin. And then the solvent is all the way up here, and that's at 2.2. And we subtract the distance from here to the origin, which is 2.2 minus 1, which gives us 1.2. And that would give us the answer 0.33. Let me know if you guys have any questions on that.
So did you just divide 4.4 divided by 1.2? Okay, thank you. That makes sense.
Yeah, that's what we did. Oops. Okay, what did you guys get for this? B. Okay, yeah. So it mentioned in the paragraph and the figure that is converting from the L isomer to the D isomer, which is what an isomerase would do, and is moving around the intramolecular arrangement, which was shown in the figure. So that's what an isomerase does. Okay. Oh, sorry. Question 4. How would you differentiate the D and the L isomers? Okay, so this would actually be D because we need to separate them, and we can use that by using a reagent that would make diastereomers, and those can be separated because those would be two different uh, what do you call those compounds with they wouldn't have identical chemical properties, but the D and L isomers have the same isoelectric point, and that would not help to separate them. And then in gel electrophoresis, they would also have the same size and same charge, which also wouldn't help. And rotation doesn't help because that can help detect the isomers, but it doesn't separate them. It will let you know that they are isomers, but it doesn't physically separate them. And the question is asking how can we separate the D and the L alanine? Does that make sense why D is a better answer choice? Okay, perfect. Number 5. Okay, so here we have to use the pH formula, and first we would convert pH is equal to negative log of the concentration of H plus ions, and we would find that by converting this. And then we also know that the concentration of the hydroxide and the concentration of the hydrogen ions is equal to 10 to the negative 14th, and then we would be able to divide that through. And that would give us the closest answer would be C. Does that make sense? Yes, okay, cool. Is there any other questions before we start the timer for the next 2 passages? I'm going to send the link for the next passage, and you guys can do both of them at once, and we'll time you. Ashley, do you want to send the link in the chat for the reproduction passage?
Yeah, I'll do that now.
Okay, thank you. And we will give you guys around 20 minutes to do both of them, and let us know when you're done. Let us know if you're done or if you need another minute.
Okay, what did everyone think of the passage on reproduction and development? Easy, medium, difficult? Yeah, it is long. Okay. So this one was a lot of reading, not a lot of data, and you will come across passages like these where it just explains a system for paragraphs and paragraphs, and it's like you may already know this, but it is good to still read over all of it, but not to overanalyze each sentence. So for the first question, does anyone want to volunteer? Okay, would you like to volunteer your answer, your explanation?
Yeah, I just read that the corpus luteum, and it's like before impregnation and placenta takes over after the egg is implanted. I think that's the information I got from the passage, so I chose that.
Yeah. So along with reading the passage, you also have to be familiar with these structures and your hormones. I've stressed this in previous sessions that you have absolutely need to know your hormones, like where they're produced and what their functions are. So the ovarian follicle only produces estradiol. So automatically A, C, and D are out, and B is your answer. But if you didn't know that, you could look at 2 and 3. The corpus luteum does produce large amounts of progesterone and as well a smaller amount of estrogen. The placenta also produces estrogen and progesterone to maintain pregnancy, right? Estrogen and progesterone are crucial for maintaining the endometrium, like the passage emphasizes for many sentences. And if you're slightly convinced that 1 is correct and you don't see an option that says 1, 2, and 3, then I would just give up 1 and go for 2 and 3. So any volunteers for this question? So the passage states that progesterone is responsible for maintaining a robust endometrium. During the topic session, I mentioned the mnemonic estrogen establishes and progesterone protects the endometrium. So that's one way you can remember the role of the two hormones. So as day 28 of the menstrual cycle approaches, progesterone levels will rapidly decrease and the endometrium is no longer protected, so it'll slough off. And yeah, you would also get like the role of progesterone from the passage when it says progesterone is responsible for maintaining a robust endometrium. And this is a picture of the menstruation cycle. So you could see as day 28 approaches, progesterone sharply decreases. And then a few days after that, you have menstruation where the endometrium just sheds. Any volunteers for this question?
I think the way I went through this was knowing that the posterior pituitary produces vasopressin and oxytocin, And the fact that there's a tumor in the posterior pituitary doesn't necessarily mean that it's either increasing or decreasing ADH and oxytocin. So I kind of went through the answer one by one. And A, increase in production of breast milk. Well, we know it's a 32-year-old woman, but we don't know if she's pregnant or anything. So that was my answer A. A decrease in urine volume. I was thinking, well, ADH would in fact decrease urine volume by increasing the reabsorption of water. And an activation of several feedback mechanisms is very possible since we're talking about the hypothalamic pituitary axis, and the increase in vasopressin is also possible. So I was just thinking A, just because we have no information about whether this woman is pregnant or not.
Yeah, so you're correct that A is the right answer. And you are right that the posterior pituitary does produce oxytocin and vasopressin, but lactogenesis, which is the production of breast milk, is mediated by the hormone prolactin, which is a hormone that's produced by the anterior pituitary gland, not the posterior pituitary. So oxytocin does play a role, but it plays a role in the secretion of breast milk, not in the production of it. So you can remember the anterior pituitary. Yeah. So you can remember the anterior pituitary hormones using the mnemonic flat pig. So F would be FSH, L, LH, A, ACTH, which stands for adrenocorticotropic hormone, T, TSH, P, prolactin, G, growth hormone. So going back to the question, you have to decide which of the following is least likely to happen. So D will happen because a tumor in the posterior pituitary will likely lead to increased vasopressin levels, which will cause the kidney to retain water and decrease urine volume. So B is out. And this will feed back into the hypothalamic pituitary axis to initiate some sort of compensation mechanism. So C is also likely to happen. And using that reasoning, along with the fact that oxytocin doesn't mediate lactogenesis, A would be your answer. Does everyone understand? Okay, good. Any volunteers for this question? So the keyword here is non-pregnant. Yeah, B is the answer. So estrogen, FSH, and LH are present in all women, pregnant or not. Only HCG is present in pregnant women. That's the hormone we use to detect pregnancy. So if you forgot about that on the exam, you can go back to the passage, right? Always remember that if the passage is super lengthy and has lots of information, it can be great in case you forgot like a small detail from your content review. So the passage says that if fertilization occurs, then HCG will be secreted to sustain the corpus luteum. So B is our answer. And for the last question, would anyone like to volunteer? Or you can just type your answer in the chat. Yeah, well, okay, so again, I had no idea what the basal layer was before I came across this passage. This is another example of where you would use your passage and your highlighted terms to answer a question. So going back to the passage, this is something that I would have highlighted because it tells me the function of something I've never heard of. The basal layer is a source of progenitor cells for the functional layer, which undergoes changes throughout the cycle, so building and shedding. It's not logical for the basal layer to go through changes because it's the source for stem cells. It's what allows the functional layer to build and shed over and over again. If our basal layer sheds during the menstrual cycle, then we wouldn't have any more progenitor cells for the next cycle. And that's not what actually happens, right? We have menstruation every month. So D would be our answer. Does that make sense? I also included a picture of the functional layer and the basal layer so it could be easier to visualize. Okay, that's good. So before we go into Sim's passage on cars, would anyone like to explain? Oh wait, I think there's a sixth question. Yeah, sorry about that. So does anyone have an answer, an explanation for this one? We're getting closer to 2 o'clock, so I'll just go ahead and explain it if that's okay. So this is the last question. For this type of question, you have to read all of the choices and determine if they're true. So A is true. Like I said in the topic session, estrogen and progesterone have a combined effect of decreasing LH levels. The purpose of this is so that there is only one ovulation occurring during one cycle. In other words, estrogen and progesterone together are preventing that LH spike that usually causes ovulation. So A is out. B is true. Estrogen increases before progesterone does during the menstrual cycle as the follicle develops. And when we reach ovulation, the corpus luteum starts secreting progesterone to maintain itself during the secretory phase. Important to know is that estrogen is still high during this stage, just not at its maximum level, which would be right before ovulation. So these two hormones are elevated at different times. So B is out. C is false. The endometrium is under the influence of only estrogen and progesterone. So remember when I said estrogen establishes, progesterone protects. So the endometrium is initially established or built by estrogen and is maintained later on by progesterone in preparation for implantation. We would circle C as our right answer, but let's double check and take a look at D. Menstruation is brought on by the sharp decline in estrogen and progesterone. Like I said, progesterone is responsible for maintaining the endometrium. Without this hormone, the endometrium will shed. So menstruation is always brought on by that sharp decline in progesterone. So before we move on to the cars passage, does anyone have any questions about this? So A is correct because estrogen and progesterone have that combined effect of suppressing LH levels. So ovulation is caused by that sharp rise in LH. And if we have two sharp rises in LH in one cycle, then we could have two fertilizations and you can't be pregnant. Like you can't have two pregnancies. Does that make sense? So estrogen and progesterone will act together to suppress LH so that there's only one ovulation. Does that make sense? Okay, great.
Okay. How do you guys think the cars passage went? Okay, cool. So we'll go over the answers now. So number one, let me know if you guys have questions, but I'm going to just tell you guys the answers just for time's sake. Okay, number one, D, this was mostly just talking about whether or not the person's personality is significantly affected by whether or not you're raised as an only child, because the passage really discussed the different, how many types of children and the if you're a middle child or older, stuff like that. Number two, please stop me if you have questions though. This is applying the question from the passage. So if you're raising multiple children, that would help to read the passage just because it discussed a lot about the different personalities of children and how they can differ based on age and when they were born. Okay, what about 3? What did you guys say for 3? D? Okay, yeah, so we mentioned in the passage that without any maternal care, that children can often become depressed. So that would lead to children be likely to be unhappy. Yep. Number 4. What did you guys put for number 4? Okay, so this is asking which assertion can be verified or refuted. So which one would be like the easiest to kind of prove wrong? And if we could like see financial support, that would be really evident if that support is right or not. Like if we saw like, bank statements or something like that that said they're not giving any support, that would prove this wrong. So that would probably be the easiest to verify. Okay, number 5. Okay, so the author is saying which one would most weaken the author's point. So the author was saying that siblings are usually really close. So, and since he was saying that it's unlikely that A would be correct because that a relationship breaking often between them is likely, that is going to weaken the author's point of view. Because he was mentioning stuff like siblings help you become close, and this is like a long-term relationship that can like bond and stuff like that. So this is probably, if this is true, that would weaken the author's point. Does anyone have any questions or why the other ones are not right? Okay. Oops. Oh, I guess I didn't put number 6, but 6 is B. I think there was a line where it says animals also compete, so that would be the best choice. And I think one more question. What did you guys put for this last question? A, yeah, so the passage mentioned a lot of differences between the children, so it's unlikely that they would behave like each other. Do you guys have any questions on the general passage or want me to go back to a question and explain anything again? Okay, if you guys had any troubles with this, I would try to go back to our car sessions and revise those strategies and stuff like that. And in those sessions, I go through the whole passage and tips and tricks. So we don't have that much time right now, but if you do need more help, you can just email or go watch the recording again. And just some other reminders. So we're having a workshop tomorrow and we hope to see you there. You can register and we'll send you the email for that. If you guys need any help with setting up schedules or MCAT strategy, stuff like that. And yeah. Ashley, do you have anything to add?
Yes, I'll be there. Come tomorrow to talk to me.
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you guys for coming today.